Hey folks, this is Samuel Heber from SamuelHeber.net, Samuel Heber on YouTube, Samuel Heber on Facebook, Heber Family Adventures on Instagram. I'm here today with yet another episode of Heroes of Autism. I'm here today with Laura, who is a organizer. If you've seen the Netflix show of that show, A Spark of Joy, when you get rid of things you don't want anymore. I can't remember the name of that show right now, but that's what she does. Lauren, can you tell the folks a bit about yourself?
Sure. Like you said, I'm a professional organizer, and I started doing that about 5 years ago. And I was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid in the 90s. And for years, I kind of felt like there was something maybe a little more going on with me. I talked to multiple doctors. I wasn't really sure. But it wasn't until last year when my son was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder on top of his ADHD diagnosis that I really looked into that. And even though we are just alike, it took me a second to kind of research and realize, oh, wow, like that sounds like me. That's like everything I was reading. I'm like, this sounds like my son, but it also sounds like me. And so in 2019, my son was diagnosed. I was diagnosed in July. Actually, it was 1 year ago today that I was diagnosed.
Happy anniversary.
Then soon, oh, thank you. And then soon after that, my two daughters were diagnosed as well, all in 2019. So it's been a wild ride so far.
Sounds like it. And what's funny is I've interviewed several moms who are on the spectrum now. And it all seems like you guys discover, hey, I have autism too, when your kids turn out to have it. I just find that a funny coincidence. Just like,
It's very interesting. That's very, very common. When in the 90s, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, it was actually before Asperger. It was like 97. So it was right around the time when Asperger's was becoming a diagnosis and the name was getting out there. But still at that time, it was believed that it was very, very rare for girls to have autism. So I think like when I was going through all the ADHD evaluations and all that psychological stuff and everything, I don't think anyone ever even thought about autism at that point because I made eye contact for most of, conversations, and I was smart. So I guess they were just that misconception that you can't be smart and be on the spectrum, which is unfortunate, I think, for a lot of people. But I think during that time, I was just completely missed because it was very rare. And then even after that, I think in my head, it was always just like, oh, I have the worst ADHD ever. And then now it all makes sense. It's easier to manage everything when you kind of know what's going on. But I've talked to a lot of moms who same experience. It wasn't until their first child was diagnosed that they really kind of were like, oh wow, this resonates.
mm-hmm. And I relate to your story so much that I was part of that 90s wave where they all thought all of us had ADHD and gave us a lot of Ritalin.
Yes.
That wasn't part
yeah. I started with Adderall myself, but I'm actually still, I haven't taken it this whole time, but I still take Adderall to kind of manage executive functioning because with 3 kids, it's very, very hard to keep track of everything and do everything I need to do. So it definitely helps.
Yeah, I use it when you need it. I've had similar experiences with that, and you're doing yourself what you need to focus. Because executive function for people on the spectrum, for those who don't know, is really hard for us. And I can't imagine what it's like having 3, kids to manage. And Adderall probably helps you make it feel like you have like 2 heads. One they can focus on one kid and the other.
Yeah, I was okay with 1 kid, and then once it was 3, it was like I have to go back and talk to somebody, and then that's kind of how that set the ball rolling with that. But yeah, it's with more than 1 kid, especially because I wasn't so great at taking care of myself either. I'm very stereotypical with that. I had to really teach myself for a very long time how to take care of myself. It's actually easier for me to take care of my kids than myself. But when you add in 3 kids to take care of, that's when it became a big challenge for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that, like, all parents go through, no matter where you have 1, 2, or 3 kids. Like, you always feel like you need to take a back burner for your kids, but if you keep doing that, your cup will be empty.
Definitely.
So for those out there, the big mystery with girls on the spectrum is that they are often good at masking, and often a lot of professionals miss the signs that, like, girls that have on the spectrum. If you could talk to professionals today about, like, hey, if you go back to like 7-year-old Laura and she was doing X, Y, and Z, that's a sign of autism. So we can help our professionals be more aware of the subtle signs of girl autism.
Yeah, that's actually really funny that you mentioned that, because I'm seeing so many things I have 2 younger girls that are ages 3 and 4, and I'm reminded of things that I used to do that I totally forgot about. So it's really funny, but I think one thing that my parents never picked up on is I toe walked like crazy as a kid, which is very common with autism, but I was also really into dancing. So they assumed I was just wanting to be a ballerina and they put me in ballet at a young age. But it's so funny because I've actually shared this with doctors and my kids' doctors, and I explained, like, that's probably one way that I got missed, because I was into ballet, and if you're a girl, they just assume, oh well, she's not toe walking, she's just into ballet. And one of the doctors I actually told that to was like, I never put that together, that's so funny. So I mean, that's one thing that I've actually mentioned. But as far as masking, I was a big time people pleaser. That was how I masked. I wanted to make my parents happy. I wanted to make teachers happy. I always had a major disconnect with what the expectations were of what I really needed to do, but I would just try my best to give teachers and my parents just everything that they would want, which internalized a lot of my frustration, and eventually really was when you start to realize that everyone's still not necessarily happy with you, it becomes a major mental health issue later. So that added up for years and years of me just trying to please everyone and not really, I obviously had no idea what masking was, so I didn't even know I was really doing it. But I think that when you're trying to please everyone and then you feel like you never really do, it just adds up for years. And this is something I'm still dealing with in therapy. So it's been a lifelong challenge related to masking for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot, and I've worked with women on the spectrum, that it's just like the people pleasing is the masking. But it's often just seen as, oh, like Laura's being cute, helping everyone out, or Marcy's helping everyone
Right.
out. It's just kind of, I think, viewed, yeah, as what women do, but that it's just a form of
Right.
masking for your anxiety, especially when you're trying to make everyone in the room happy, which is impossible, but you're still like hell bent on
Right.
like pleasing everyone. I've experienced that myself. It's the way we like just match
Hmm.
our social anxiety. It's like we're often like deadpan, and no one can tell we're anxious. But
Hmm.
seems what you're saying is you show your anxiety through your actions, your social anxiety.
Right.
Um,
Definitely.
so, are your kids aware that you're on the spectrum?
Definitely. We're very, very open about it. It's actually a really beautiful thing that we can kind of all go through it together and grow together, and gain understanding together. As far as I know, I mean, I have some suspicions in my family, but even with ADHD, I was very alone in my family with it. So just the fact that my kids are going through this with me is really, really special to me. But also that they have each other is really special to me.
Mhm.
So we talk about it a lot. My youngest, she's 3. She also has a developmental delay and a couple other things. So she gets a lot of services, not right now with COVID and everything, but she was getting services in the home through the county. But so it's something that everyone's very aware of. We talk about it a lot, and we are kind of always growing together, or kind of sharing. My son's older, he's 10, so he was diagnosed, he was almost 9 at the time, so he's had about a year to kind of process it, same as me. And we're still, learning new things all the time and figuring everything out together. So
that's really great. So you talked a little bit earlier about your executive functioning. Apart from using Adderall, like, can you give some advice out there to moms? Because this is actually a topic that I'm doing some research on, executive functioning with autistic people, and hope to do my own videos on it. But how do you stay organized? How do you get things done with 3 children and a household to take care of? Like, what are some tips you have?
right, I think it depends. Yeah, for me, I'm very routine oriented, which is obviously pretty common within the spectrum. But what I've really done is making sure to incorporate everything I need to do in the routine. So I'm kind of doing the same thing every day, because in a lot of ways, autism and ADHD, they either work together or they make everything harder together. So it's like, so that's one of those things where I love routine, but it's very hard for me to keep up with it, which is probably more the ADHD. So I kind of, the way I combat that is by adding the things that I really need to do into my daily routine. So I'm getting used to it. And then eventually it kind of just becomes like, this is what I do. And then I also use the Timo app, which is like a time management and routine app that helps a lot. And that's been huge, especially this year with my son learning at home and all of that being in added to my plate this year. I definitely use apps. I struggle a little bit with too much digital, so I also try to write things down as well. So it adds time to my day, but it helps me remember things. It helps me be intentional and make sure that I'm not just, because sometimes I'll just not think about anything that I need to do. It just completely slips my mind. So when I take that extra time to sit down and like, okay, I'm going to write down everything I need to do and think about it, that really helps me as well. So it's kind of, for me, just making a little extra time of thinking about it, figuring out everything I need to do, and then kind of planning it throughout the day. And I still, even though I've been doing this for a couple years, I still struggle, and it's still not easy, but it's getting easier. By the year, it's getting a little easier.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head for people on the spectrum to get better at executive functioning. Apart from taking things that help us focus, it's about creating as many visuals as you can to remind you of what you have to do throughout the house, for your children, for your job. And speaking of your job, as we talked about earlier, organizer of a house, do you think your autism has helped? Because one thing that is universal, autistic people, we have great attention to detail. Do you think that is like a superpower that allows you to be a great organizer?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because before I knew I was autistic, other ADHD people, I was very much involved in that community for a long time before I realized I was on the spectrum. And people used to ask me all the time, like, how are you an organizer? Like, I don't get it, because a lot of the times people with just ADHD or not autism and ADHD, they often kind of struggle with that routine and the same thing every day and kind of keeping the organization type stuff. And so that was one of the things when I realized I was on the spectrum that made so much sense for me, because I have always been, even as a kid, I wanted things a certain way, and it had to be, lined up just right. And it didn't necessarily have to always be tidy, but as I kind of grew up, I had to overcome those challenges of like living in chaos. So I learned a lot of the skills and kind of started from scratch myself. But the thing that really helped me in my business is my advanced pattern recognition, which I see now. And I can somehow, and I don't know how, and I don't know how to explain it, I can get to know my clients, I can see their house, and I just kind of know what's going to help them, like how to kind of get organized and what might work for them. And I pick up on it quicker, and from what I've heard from my clients and feedback, quicker, and also we do things a lot faster, even ones that have worked with organizers in the past. So I really think autism has made me a lot more gifted at what I do, as far as helping people, and we do it even faster, I've heard. So it's been a great asset for that. And also it's working one-on-one with people, which I tend to like a little better than, I'm definitely not like a big group person. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the best way to describe what you're doing for the folks that have followed me for a bit is, I like to quote Temple Grandin a lot, is that our minds are often like Google, and what I'm visualizing right now is you can like see their house like clearly in your head, like an image. You're just kind of going through and like sorting through, like, almost like you're going through a Google. Would you think it's like kind of like that?
right. Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually don't have visual images in my head. I don't know if you've ever heard of aphantasia. It's kind of a newer thing that people are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an official diagnosis or anything, but I'm not really sure why I don't, but I don't think I ever have. So it's even harder to explain how I know
Mm-hmm.
like what's going to help people, because I can't even really visualize it. And it also, I think, makes me even more visual in my day-to-day life. But I don't know how. It literally is like, I just know. It's like an intuition that I have in my head of like what's going to look good and what's going to work, even though I can't see it in my head. It's pretty amazing. Like autistic brains are really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. They definitely are, and that's really interesting. I never heard it described that way, but yeah, intuition I think is like the perfect word for what you're describing, like a gut feeling. Um,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
so how has your social skills improved while being organized? So you have to go into someone's house and make them feel comfortable with you being there and moving stuff around. For anyone who is interested in like a job like that, or a realtor, or someone that has to do something like what you do, what would your advice
Right.
be for how to socialize?
Yeah, so I think that the wonderful thing about this field that I went into is that I can make my own schedule. I'm in control of kind of the situations that I'm in and things like that. So what I've been able to do is kind of figure out like how many hours a day I can handle, and then only schedule those amount of hours. And this greatly helps my social skills, because while I don't experience like selective mutism or anything like that, I do find that I kind of have this point where I'm just done and I don't really
Mhm.
understand it. And it's really just mostly social. I just get to this point where I'm just like, okay, wrap it up. So once I kind of figured that out, it made scheduling a lot easier, and it made socializing with my clients a lot easier as well. But I've always been better one-on-one socially. And I think I didn't even realize that I had social struggle. It's funny because we always talk about self-awareness and how autistic people can sometimes have an issue with that, or really neurodivergent in general. And I was completely not self-aware that I had any social challenges, which is really funny because when I read the list online of like more female type symptom or traits of autism, it was so funny because I resonated with so many of them, but for some reason I never knew that I had any type of social issues,
Mhm.
because I don't know, it was like a new way of presenting that information. But what I didn't realize is that while I can communicate fine, I received information often wrong, or not how the other person intended me to receive them. So since learning about what specific challenges I have, it has greatly improved. And I've learned I've learned, if I'm not sure, to just ask. That's a huge thing. I think I used to, probably going back to my people pleasing days, you just like, yeah, give people whatever answer you think they might want. So especially with clients, it's been, if I'm not totally sure what they want, it's been really important to just ask them. And I know that sounds so simple, but that was a huge challenge for me, in personal life, professional life, and really everywhere. So it's little things like that that have really made a huge difference socially for me.
Yeah, and I think I understand like having a schedule like that still, because you know how much time you're going to be with that person, so how long you have to be friendly, and then like once that time's
Exactly.
up, you can let your guard down. Uh,
Right.
I really like that about a schedule too. Like, okay, I just have to be happy Sam for X amount of time, and then
Right.
and, and having that structure.
Yes.
Um, and how has that affected your personal life, like with dating, and now you realize that you have like these social issues, like looking back on your dating life, did that affect it at all?
I think so. Yeah, I really think it's affected, a lot of things. And it's funny because when you get a late diagnosis, that's kind of what you do. You kind of like relive your whole life and think about it in a different perspective. And I mean, I've just been doing that this whole year, kind of thinking back on things like that. And I think that it's definitely affected everything for sure. And me and my husband have been, it obviously doesn't change. Like after you get a diagnosis, I was obviously autistic since birth. We just didn't know it. And I didn't really mask too much with my husband. I'm not totally sure why, but I just always felt very safe and accepted with him, which is a great thing. So I never really masked with him. So there wasn't really huge changes with our relationship. But there has been major differences in how I parent, which is interesting. So there used to be I guess I used to have the attitude like, oh, well, all moms are different. This is just how I am. But I've made more of an effort as I've learned more, as my kids have gotten their therapies, as I've gotten my own therapy to kind of like work through all this. I've realized that there's a lot of things that I want to be more involved with them and socially and everything. Like it was hard for me to like sit and play with my kids before, which is really, really important for kids' development. And my parents never did that, which I've heard is not like an autism thing. It's more of like a learned thing that you're supposed to kind of learn from your parents. So I would say socially, I've been making a lot more of a social effort with my kids and just spending more like quality time with them. And just admitting, I need to try harder in this area and doing it. It's been really, really rewarding, just spending that time with them, learning to play with them. Like I never was good with pretend play when I was a kid, and things like that. But I'm like learning it now in my 30s, which is really weird, but it's fun. Like at first it was really like, why am I doing this? I can't do things that I don't like to do. Like it's like painful. So at first it was really hard and I'm just sitting there like, ugh, why do I have to do this? But after like a day or two of really just sitting there and working through it, I kind of got it and I'm starting to be better at it. My kids are a lot happier that they have someone, not just each other, but someone to kind of play with them a little more. And my husband plays with them too. And that's kind of the excuse I use is, oh, well, he plays with them and it's okay if I don't. But I think understanding, social challenges has made me want to work on them more for not just me, but for my kids as well.
Mm-hmm. I love it because we are the example for our children, autistic or not. If you're autistic, they're autistic. You both are.
Mm-hmm.
They're watching you. I think that's the biggest thing, and it's great that you're learning to do imaginary play because that is hard for a lot of people on the spectrum because we're such black and white thinkers.
Yeah.
So something so abstract is like, what's
Right.
the purpose of this?
Right. That was totally me, like even as a little kid, or just like why I remember in kindergarten all the girls would play house and one would be the mom and one would be the baby and then there would be all of that. And I remember thinking like that is the weirdest thing. Like why do they do that? That is not fun. Like I just wanted to run around and play sports and like run around with the boys. And I found that so much easier. And I found, socializing with girls, even in kindergarten, was way more draining for me because there was so much more talking and, a lot more pretend play and things like that I just didn't get, which is funny now knowing what I know, looking back. But yeah.
Yeah, if you knew what you knew now, you could go back in time and say, look, just for, put some realistic factors to it to make it worthwhile, and like find your niche
Right.
with it.
Right.
So another big thing a big stigma that I am trying to end through my show, Laura, is the idea that autistic people cannot form deep, meaningful relationships, particularly romantic ones, because I do a lot of public speaking, and people are shocked to find out that I'm married and have a child. Like they look at me like this unicorn. But doing this show, I've met you and a couple other parents who are on the spectrum. Like, oh my God, there's another unicorn and another and another. So like we're out there more
Right.
often. Has that been like your experience like that? Everyone just like, wait, your children have, but you do too?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really, really unfair stereotype, first of all. And I think that it touches on this deep-rooted issue with autistic people that the general public has, because for someone to just assume that you can't form a meaningful relationship because of your neurotype is really, if you really think about it, that's absurd. Like, I don't know. And I've also been married twice. So I think that we are all so different, and some people on the spectrum are going to prefer to be alone, and that is their choice, and that's totally okay. But I think all of us need some sort of meaningful relationship in some way, and that may be really being really close to your parents, it may be a sibling, it may be cousins, it may be best friends. But most of the people that I know that have been late diagnosed are married. Some are doctors. I've had doctors reach out to me. I haven't really mentioned, but I have a podcast that I started in real time last year when I realized I was possibly on the spectrum, and I've been recording it in real time and sharing my journey. It's called the Not Neurotypical Podcast. And on my Instagram, I've met a lot of people kind of going through the same thing as me, and it's been really, really rewarding. But I just want to point out that so many people, even doctors who diagnose autism in children, have reached out to me and said, I never realized that I was also autistic, and this was my job. And they've made it through med school. This idea that autistic people are a certain way and only capable of so much and all of that is so unfair and so wrong. And it's so important that people realize that there are already autistic doctors, lawyers, anything out there, CEOs, I'm sure there is. I don't know of any offhand, but I'm sure there's an autistic CEO, because you have to be creative and detail oriented and inspiring. And I find so many autistic people to be that. But it's really, really unfair. And I have to say, though, that in the wrong relationship, it is very bad for me. But in the right relationship, like my current husband, we have a very, very rewarding relationship and a very deep connection. And it's something that I never felt before. So I think it's just really important to realize that we are different in different environments. So in a bad relationship, it's going to look like we are terrible at relationships. But in a good relationship, it's not going to look the same, because we're in a very different environment. So I think that's more the misconception. People just don't understand the extremes of our environments and how it affects us more than anything. But I hate that people use that to kind of judge outcomes of people, and it's just really wrong.
So for the other Aspies out there that are watching this, a lot of us like very clear visuals. So what is like a healthy relationship? Like comparing your first marriage to your second marriage, like how is your current husband? Like, how are you able to form that bond? Like, oh, this is like man of my dreams, and like actually connect with him and actually love him.
Yeah. So I think that one thing I really love about my husband is that he was always very accepting, no matter how weird or crazy I seemed, or, all my weird interests that I have. And we actually have a lot of the same interests, which of course, as you know, is very important for autistic people. I
Yeah.
would say that like all of my closer relationships, we are close because we have similar interests. So that's really important to me. But I would say that I think I just never felt judged by him. I was always very accepted. Um, he's always given me kind of like extra time to process things. He's never, I'm very demand avoidant as well. So if I feel like someone is like pressuring me, it's very hard for me to do things. And he was never really like that either. So I would say he just let me be myself. And that's been huge. And and I never had that before. And honestly, probably not any relationship before that. And I didn't really I definitely have lower empathy in a lot of ways. So in my head, it was like love doesn't exist, and there, no one's ever going to understand me and all of that. But once I had that from somebody, it's been really, really rewarding, and it helps me kind of understand now what goes into rewarding relationships. But the funny thing is that makes a good relationship for anybody, not just an autistic person. Like obviously accepting someone for who they are and loving them just the way they are, and giving them different needs that they have, or supporting them in those things. That just makes a good relationship for anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you hit on a lot of really good points there. Always start with shared interests. If you have a lot of things in common, that means you're probably compatible. Because that often leads to you have similar life goals. And
Right.
you just keep look for the similarities, and like how do you and your partner's strengths match up. Like Laura's really good at some stuff, and her husband's really good at other stuff. That's how you really learn to be compatible.
Yeah, and speaking of that too, that's another thing that I forgot to mention that's very true. The things that I really struggle with, my husband is really good at, and he's very open to like helping me with those without judging me. Like for instance, very typical, I don't remember to eat or drink. I don't feel hunger or thirst a lot. So like he'll just randomly text me while he's at work, like, have you eaten? Have you had something to drink? And it's really helpful with those kind of things. And he's great at it. And he's actually very routine oriented as well, which is good because I really need that, or my whole life just falls into chaos. So we're both very routine oriented together, and our lifestyles are very similar. So he likes things tidy. Obviously, I like things tidy, and we kind of just work together. And that's, I think, what's really important, and what is so different about my past relationships, and has helped me a lot. So yeah, I think it's good to find someone who's willing to support you, but also help you with the areas that you're maybe not so good at. And that's what really makes our relationship so much different than the relationships in the past for me.
How do you guys communicate? So like, say like, I don't know if you've ever had like you call an autism meltdown or a sensory overload situation. How do you communicate to him, like, honey, like, don't talk to me right now, or are you someone who likes deep pressure hugs when you're having a moment as an autism?
I'm not that way at all. Like I'm touch avoidant in a lot of ways, especially when I'm like overstimulated. But for me, I retreat to my room. I make everything dark, and I just lay in my bed in silence, sometimes with my noise canceling headphones on, and just kind of decompress that way when I'm really overwhelmed. And I honestly just tell him straight up, like, I have to go to my room. And he knows what that means. He's like, okay, she's overwhelmed, she's overloaded. And sometimes it happens at not great times, and that's something that we've had to work through. Like, say, if the kids are like all three of them, so we all like feed off of each other. That's like one challenge of all being autistic. So if my youngest decides to scream a lot that day, it obviously affects all of us, because then my other two kids will end up screaming at some point because they're overloaded. And of course, it's no different for me either. So what I really try to do is communicate that. I'll tell my husband when the screaming starts, I'll be like, it's already starting today. So kind of like prepare him. Like when he gets home from work, I'm probably going to have to go to my room. And it's not like I do that every day. But the days where I kind of just feel like, okay, I'm going to need it, I just let him know early if I can. Or sometimes I just tell him like, I'm overloaded, I need a break or something. And he's very, some days he's not like super happy about it, but he does it. And some days he is very supportive and, you know, because he also goes to work and has his own stuff to do. So I get that's not ideal every day, but I think just being real about it. Like sometimes I think if you are masking, you're more likely to not share those kind of things. But the second I get overloaded, I really communicate that to him. And not every time do I have to like go to my room and decompress and all of that. But I think it's just good to let the people around you know what is going on internally so that when you do melt down or something like that, maybe that could have been avoided because someone could help you and help you out, you know, when you're upset, or people won't act like you're crazy, which is a horrible thing to say, but that's often how we're treated when we go into meltdown mode, because you already let them know that you're at a heightened state of, you know, either sensory or overwhelm or something like that. So I think just like that communication beforehand is so important. So people kind of know what's going on with you before you freak out and melt out and all of that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's excellent advice. And the key here, folks, is self-advocacy. If Laura does not tell her husband that she's overloaded, that's just going to only escalate the situation and make us say things we don't mean to say, or
right.
it can overwhelm the situation. Because for those who don't know, at this point, for someone like Laura or me, our fight or flight response has been triggered. So we need that space and that time to decompress. For her, it's sound canceling headphones. Me, I take a shower or a bath for like 20 minutes and just get back down to the center.
Right.
I guess, do you have any advice for any moms who are on the spectrum who got pregnant for the first time? Like, you know, what to expect? Because I've talked to a few moms about this, but like for all the sensory stuff that we go through, I've been curious what's that like for you, and if you have any advice.
Yeah. So when I had all three of my kids, I did not know that I was autistic yet, but it's so funny looking back because that's one of those things I told you, how you like think about all the stuff you've been through in your life. And being pregnant for me all three times was really hard. I did not like it. It was worth it every time, but not while it was happening. And the truth was, it was sensory hell for me, like very, very tough. Your body changes very fast. I always gained a lot of weight quickly when I was pregnant, no matter what I ate. I think it was a lot of water weight, but I would retain a lot more weight, which would weigh on me. And since I know a lot of autistic people do like extra pressure, but I don't. So I felt kind of like I had a weighted blanket on me all the time. That's really honestly like what it felt like, especially in the second and third trimester. And I don't like weighted blankets. So I think like I don't know. I did not handle pregnancy very well, honestly. I would probably have handled a lot of things very differently if I knew what was going on and why. But it was really funny because so many women love being pregnant. And I used to think, what is wrong with me? I hate this. Like, is there something wrong? Like, am I going to be especially the first time, I'm like, am I going to be a good mom if I hate being pregnant? But I think that the self-care aspect is so important when you're pregnant, because there are a lot of outside, it's another environment thing where like sometimes you can't sleep because your hormones are going crazy and things like that. And sleep is so important for me with my functioning. And I did not sleep good at all. Actually for 2 of my 3 pregnancies, I barely slept. And I felt like every day I was just overloaded and tired and upset and having meltdowns a lot. And at the time, people are just like, oh, she's pregnant, and roll their eyes. But now I realize this was just like, I was having like crazy sensory overload every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what comes into play is really the best advice I can give is to understand those whatever sensory issues you have, and deal with them as good as you can ahead of time. So like for me, once I'm in sensory overload, noise canceling headphones don't do much for me after the fact, like, or once I'm in it, but they do help me beforehand. So like if my kids start screaming, I just put them on before I'm overloaded, because I've noticed it helps me not get there to where I'm like freaking out. But once I'm there, it's very hard to get rid of without, decompressing in some way or all of that. So I think anticipating sensory challenges before they happen when you're pregnant is really important, which is hard to do because a lot of women still work while they're pregnant. If it's your second or third kid, you already have kids, so you can't just like lay in bed all day and things like that. But I think just doing what you can when you can to help beforehand, I think, is probably the best advice I can give.
Yeah, I think that's definitely key for any woman, but especially for women on the spectrum, like having what I like to call sensory bag, things that help calm you down, whether it be like a chewy or noise canceling headphones, essential oils, whatever it may be, anything that calms you and helps you keep going. Because the big thing I think a lot of people on the spectrum get stuck with is when a pattern is interrupted, like a routine. Oh, I can't just lay on the bed like my last pregnancy. Oh, I have to still get up and work and raise a toddler, and you have to keep going. Like, so doing things that soothe us help the pattern move forward rather than us getting stuck. Or for you, so you don't get stuck in your bed with your noise canceling headphones and your husband has to do everything. This is how we get ourselves out of bed, not our partner getting us out of bed. I think it's just so important. How do you communicate with your kids, like setting the boundaries and helping them understand like what they can and can't do?
Well, that's a really loaded question. I think that's a tough one. I think for any parent, it's really hard. I don't know if it's just because I'm autistic or what, but I'm always like questioning, like, is this going to affect them when they're older and all of that? And I think way too deeply and about some things. But I think just being real with my kids has been huge. Like if I'm overloaded and they're screaming, I'll literally tell them, I'll be like, could you please not scream? It actually hurts my head. I'll let them know. I won't just say, don't scream or you're going to be in trouble. Like I'll let them know why I don't want them to scream. And I think that's a huge thing. And that might be because they're autistic as well. And it kind of helps them, gain some empathy for me if I'm kind of explaining why I don't want them to do something. But I think really explaining things helps a lot. And that's something that I started doing because I realized as a kid, I had baby boomer parents who were like, do as I say, not as I do. And you just have to do it because of respect and all of that. And that was very hard for me as a kid. So I think my parenting style is very, very different. I definitely don't let them just like run free and do whatever they want, but I'm very open with them and I explain. I think just over communication has not necessarily been a bad thing because it helps us kind of get on the same page. It helps them kind of see how to communicate. If I do yell when I don't really want to, or I kind of lose control, I will say I'm sorry to them and things like that. And I think that kind of helps them understand that we're not perfect and it's okay. And we can all kind of like work on things together. And, I'm just real with them, honestly, I think a lot more than my parents were with me. Because they were very like, do as I say, not as I do. This is just how it's going to be. You must respect me and all of that. But I'm definitely very opposite than
that. Yeah, I think that's the huge thing. Is like we are the example for our children. Like, and I think back then, like with your parents' generation, like things that they thought kids were, for lack of a better word, like stupid or not paying attention to the fact that they were doing the opposite of what they were telling them to do. And especially
Oh,
for people like
definitely.
you and me, like it's just assuming, oh, because they never make eye contact, they must not be listening, but we are listening and watching our parents out of the corner of our eye and seeing everything.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think like I was always very, very hyper. A lot of the stuff I was doing, I understand now were actually stims, but it was, they didn't really understand that because I just wouldn't sit still all the time. I didn't
yeah,
necessarily flap, I didn't really do that, but I did a lot of stim like movements, like repetitive and things like that. And they used to get so annoyed with it. And I have to admit, it's annoying for me sometimes as well with my kids. Like that's like a natural thing. If someone is like vocal stimming and I'm very sensitive to audio stuff, it does affect me, and I don't always love it. But I just, try to do what I can. I put my headphones on. I don't want to stop my kids from stimming, obviously, when it's definitely not necessary to do so. But sometimes it's not fun, and you just kind of do the best you can. But I think just like uh shutting your kid up or making them feel like what they're doing is wrong and things like that, I definitely think that's the wrong way to handle that.
that's perfect. And and that's up to the kid. You're teaching your kids also to honor their limits too, as children and as adults.
Yeah,
Like the limits, can be managed in a healthy, thriving way.
right.
Um,
Exactly.
so what do you do for self care besides sitting in your bed with your noise canceling headphones? What are some things, like say you have to market with your 3 kids and they're all like, "Buy me this, mom! Buy me that!" They're all shouting, which I'm sure you've experienced.
Yeah.
How do you
Oh
handle
yeah,
a situation
definitely.
like that?
It's hard, and it's something that I've more recently, I would say in the past, like before I really understood my sensory issues that I have, I would just do the same thing that my dad did, like be quiet, you're being too loud, all of that over and over and over again. And it was really unhealthy. And as a parent, that doesn't make you feel good either, when you're constantly telling your kids to stop and things like that. But I've been there, I've done that. And I think once the biggest thing is really just like understanding what your challenges are so you can know how to deal with them. And that's what made my life so different as a parent, personally for myself. And I think, like I said in the last question, communicating with my kids, like when they're all freaking out, like not just saying, please be quiet, all over and over and over again. I'll actually tell them and nicely explain, I'm really sorry. I know, it's fun. You're having fun right now, but
Mhm.
it's just so loud and it's really hurting me. And we just got to get through this. And I kind of like try to get them involved in some way. That really helps. Like when I'm like, okay, here's our mission. Like I'll make things kind of fun and adventurous, and kind of just redirect them. Kind of that really helps a lot. When I'm overloaded, when they're overloaded, just trying to get their mind off of whatever they were doing, and then we focus on something else. And that's helped a lot. And their speech therapist actually recommended that to me, and it's been a life changer. So it's been really good.
That's great, and those were a lot of good tips for a lot of autistic parents out there. Because for me, the supermarket can be a very daunting place sensory-wise. The
Oh
smells
yeah,
and the bright colored packaging and other people whizzing around, and
definitely.
add COVID-19 on top of that. Just
Right now you're like anxious about even
mm,
going there, and yeah, more than you might have been before. I know it's the supermarket shopping is always, I've never liked it ever. It was like another one of those things that I'm just like, oh, that makes sense, why I hate it so much. And the truth is, in that scenario, my husband just does that as much as possible because he's fine with it. We just have like a family list of things we need every week. And when I think of something, I just write it on the list, and then he just goes and gets everything because I most of the time can't handle it. So I just don't even go as much as I can.
right. And that's great. Again, you and your partner working good together. I think that's the key, folks, is communication, which is funny because we're stereotyped as people that don't know how to communicate. But in order to, people keep asking, how can autistic people thrive? Well, it's through communication. You find that
Definitely.
that person speaks our language. The fact that your husband
Right.
is routine oriented too, he speaks Laura's language. So that's
Right.
where they're able to communicate other than through guessing games, or you should just know Godmark, or whatever her
Right.
husband's name is.
Right.
Uh, and I think that's one thing about beautiful thing about having an autistic partner is that it really forces you to be very specific on what you want. And I think that's really powerful for
Yeah.
any marriage to be like, this is exactly what I want, not leaving your partner half guessing, which can create unnecessary tensions.
Right.
It seems like
Right. And
that's
that
what
was always my challenge in friendships as well, because I never really, especially with women who don't always communicate, what type of friendship they're looking for. And it's definitely a great thing to have with my husband, because I have not had that much in the past, and it creates a lot of anxiety in me, because I'm always like, what do they want? Should I ask? Like, is this weird if I ask? It's like I'm always thinking too much about all that kind of stuff.
I've been there so much myself, with just asking too much, or then if I ask too much, then they'll hate me. That whole social anxiety, like.
Right. And it's
But
all internal. Like, no one
Mhm.
knows we're thinking like all of these things that would make no sense to them, and then at the end, if they did hear you, they'd be like, just ask. Why are you like worried about it? But we're just like, should I ask this? Should I ask that? Am I going to be annoying if I ask? It's like just way too much. So that's why the acceptance from my husband is so nice, because I don't have those worries. I know I can just ask him anything I'm thinking, and I'm not going to be judged for it. And I think if you love an autistic person, or even I know like people with ADHD also have a lot of issues with little things like that, because they tend to be a little more direct as well. But I think that's like one of the best gifts you can give an autistic person, is just allowing them to ask whatever they want in their head, and answering it for them, and just being like understanding in that way, because that so much of the anxiety socially is like not even knowing if you can ask a question.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just like basically like algorithm, like Einstein equals MC squared.
Yeah.
It's like you give people a visual,
Right.
and it's like instead of just like instinctually just saying yes or no, we have to like analyze. But okay, if they react this way, how am I going to respond to that? Like if we're trying, like
Oh yeah.
we're actors going line, line.
Right. Definitely. And I'm the same way. I like, not only am I thinking if I should ask the question, I'm like, well, what will happen if I ask it, and all that. Yeah, I think way too much, for sure.
Mhm. What's a good tip to stop thinking too much and just like, all right, Laura, make a decision.
I don't know, you tell me. I have no idea. Like, I'm a thinker. I've always been that way. I think just the only advice I have that I've actually gotten a little better at is just reframing my thoughts, and almost like self-coaching myself. So if I ask in my head, if I'm like, if I ask that question, no one's gonna like me, I stop, and I'm just like, wait, that's not a real, the idea that our lies, that our thoughts can lie to us, and a lot of the time it's anxiety, and it's not even like real, like it's not even your real thoughts, you're just, things pop into your head. I think like understanding that has been huge for me. I'm always going to be an overthinker, so I can't change that. But what I can do is kind of try to think healthier. So when something like really negative pops in my head, I will kind of be like, oh, that's not true. I'm sure people think I'm insane with this too. Like if they hear me talking to myself, because I totally do. But sometimes I'll think things, and if it's really negative, I'm like, that's not true. And kind of like ask it in a healthier way, and kind of just talk it out with myself. And I think that's really helped the overthinking issue, because I'm always going to think a lot. Things are always going to rush into my head. I shouldn't like change that, because that's always going to happen. But I can kind of, what I can control is calling out thoughts that are harmful to me or might not help the relationships that I'm in, if they're negative about the other person and things like that, and reframing them. So that's helped me a lot.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that is the key, to keep reframing it, looking at it from a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to visualize that scene. It's like scene in Star Wars where like Obi-Wan's talking to Luke about his father being Darth Vader, and it's like from a different point of view. The visual I like to use, like, it should be really hard for someone on the
Right.
spectrum, because like I got hurt doing it this way, or if I twist it around, like I might hurt somebody else.
Right.
That change in perspective, like, you know, in the movie, Luke gets the will to try to save his father's soul, which he does, by looking at his
Right.
father not as this murdering psychopath, but as his father. I think it's so
Right.
powerful.
Yeah. And I think that's helped a lot. And I think a lot of my social issues in the past were really not like I made them up, but really just from my internalized anxiety and me not addressing it and just avoiding people. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help me. It isolates me, and it's just really unhealthy. So I think just like understanding that you're gonna think anxious thoughts sometimes, but then learning how to deal with those thoughts is a huge thing. And it helps you, also the relationships and the people that are around you, and everybody helps.
Mm-hmm. I think you said it perfectly there. Um, just being able to find a way to relate to someone, find that special interest, helps you get past all those early social anxieties that we've been talking about. It keeps us from thinking that the situation is going to go badly, that there actually do have something in common with every person that you meet, including potential boyfriends
Right.
and girlfriends or your children.
Hmm.
And it's really big to make your world more visual, or in your place through intuition, like trusting your gut.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, how, if any young autistic people out there are watching this video and wondering how Laura and I got to this point, it's like we had to learn to trust ourselves. That being an adult is all
Yeah.
about trusting your decision-making skills. So if you're struggling to trust yourself, but
Hmm.
you want to be an adult, start with learning to trust yourself and your ability to make decisions in a romantic relationship, in a friendship, in a work relationship, with your children. Is definitely a huge part that I'm taking away from what Laura's telling us and what I've
Yep.
talked about previously on the show. So, Laura, I always like to end my interviews with the following question. If you could change the way the world sees autism in one way, what would it be and why?
One way, just one.
Yeah.
There's so many, but I think the biggest thing would be seeing it as a negative.
Mhm.
I think that everyone has positives and negatives, no matter what kind of person they are. Everyone has weaknesses and strengths. And I think that autistic people are no different. And I think to assume that autism is negative is unfair and wrong, especially before you get to know the person. No matter what someone's ability is, or if they are disabled from autism or anything, I think that it's really important to see people as human first and get to know them, and not see things as negative just based off of a diagnosis. I think that would be the first thing I would change.
Mhm. I think that is actually perfect. Like, just seeing the person as they really are. And that's really huge. And I think that's how you help your children see who they are, how your husband sees you, because he sees Laura, not autism. Like, that should be
Right.
our label, our names, not a diagnosis. And
Right.
like I
And
have
we're
to
all
say,
so different. So you have to get to know us first, because we're not all going to be the same. It's really important that you don't see us as just autistic, because even some of us, that is a big part of our identity, but it's not our personality. You know what I mean? Like we're all very, very different.
yeah, our personalities are shared interests. Our emotions, learning to self-regulate our emotions. I think something that all people do, and that realizes that autistic people and neurotypical
Mm-hmm.
people actually have a lot in common. That we're all learning how to be human, how to express ourselves, and process our feelings and process other people's feelings. We're all in this journey together, and I think
Mm-hmm.
once anyone realizes that, it's easy to connect really with anyone, no matter if you're right wing or left wing,
Definitely.
no matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a way. You mentioned you have a podcast, Laura. Can you tell the folks a bit about that and how they can follow you and all that stuff?
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram at Laura Zdan. That's LauraZdan. And my podcast is called the Not Neurotypical Podcast. Like I said, I started that. I actually was so overwhelmed when I realized that I was on the spectrum. And it wasn't even positive or negative. I think it was like that concept of the light bulb goes off and then your whole world comes crashing down because I was just like realizing too many things at once.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I have a large background in music and everything. So it wasn't hard for me to get into. I've like recorded my own music a lot and things like that. So it wasn't hard for me to get into the podcasting world. But I don't know why. I just hit record and started talking. I think I was talking about it so much to my husband, and he never said it, but I know I was driving him crazy because I mean, for the past year, this is all I've talked about. This is most of what I've done. It's all been autism oriented, as I learn and grow. And I just hit record and I recorded it all in real time. And it ended up being so rewarding because so many people that have found the podcast have reached out to me and say, like, this is my life. Like, it's like, you know me, it's like you describe me. Men and women have it's resonated with. And I'm so happy that I ended up sharing because I recorded probably about 4 episodes and I had not released it yet. And I almost never did. So I'm really happy that I did because putting myself out there has been way more rewarding than if I would have just internalized this like I always did and avoided it and just tried to run away from it. And I'm so happy that I did not do that. But the podcast is literally me info dumping about my autistic journey. So if you're into that, you'd probably love it. If you are not really into that, it's definitely just about my autism journey for the most part. But you can listen to it, the Not Neurotypical Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. So it's up on Apple Podcasts and everything. And then follow me on Instagram at Laura Zdan.
All right, excellent. Laura, thank you so much for coming on my show today. Folks, Laura, check out her podcast. This has been another exciting episode of Heroes of Autism, learning about motherhood and being on the spectrum and learning to really thrive in life, dismissing stigma against autism every day on this show. Because I like to say on this show, autism is not a disability, it's a community. And Laura, thank you for becoming a part of my little community.
That's right.
Um,
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks, it's been another exciting episode of Heroes of Autism. This is Tim here signing off.